This podcast episode was made possible in part with support from Sacred Rights, a project funded by the Henry Luce Foundation and the E. Rhodes and Leona B. Carpenter Foundation and hosted by Northeastern University. Sacred Rights is a project that supports public scholarship on religion and provides resources and networks for scholars of religion committed to translating the significance of their research to a broader audience. I recommend you learn more about Sacred Rights on their website at sacred-rights.org or find Sacred Rights on Twitter at sacred_rights. The impact and legacy of the Wu-Tang Clan on hip-hop and music more broadly is undeniable. The stories within their music delight listeners such as Marcus Evans. Marcus Evans is a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Religious Studies at McMaster University in Hamilton, Ontario. He earned his BA and MA in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at Western Kentucky University. Marcus is currently interested in religion and spirituality in Afro-Asian encounters and arts, and his dissertation explores Afro-Asian style and spirituality in the hip-hop productions of RZA and the Wu-Tang Clan. In this conversation, we trace the Wu-Tang Clan's music over 2 decades and discuss religion and world building within the Wu-Tang catalog. As a huge music nerd with an interest in religion myself, this episode is one of the most crucial in the entire Classical Ideas collection, and I really hope that you enjoy this conversation with Marcus Evans. Marcus Evans, welcome to Classical Ideas Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Greg.
I'm really excited that you're here, Marcus. We're going to have a really nice chat today about your work and some of your interests in academics. And I'm wondering if you can just start off by introducing yourself a little bit to the listeners out there so they know who you are and what you do.
I'm a Ph.D. candidate at McMaster University in the field of religion and the social sciences. My interest is around phenomenology of religion, as well as in religion and popular culture and religion and cross-cultural encounters. I think that what ultimately kind of motivates my work is this concern with meaning making, myth making, world making, and identity making in places such as film, literature, music, and cross-cultural exchanges. And so basically what I do is kind of bring a phenomenology of religion approach to a kind of cultural study of, cultural productions. So my focus on my research right now for the last few years, since I've been a PhD candidate, has been on exploring such themes as meaning making and world making in Afro-Asian encounters, as well as in the productions of a hip hop group called the Wu-Tang Clan. So that's what I do.
Awesome. I love it. I want to know a little bit about your academic journey. I know that you did an undergrad and a master's in philosophy and religion at Western Kentucky, and that you've been working on your PhD at McMaster in Hamilton. Tell me a little bit about that, those stepping stones that you've been on the last, several years of your life.
Yeah, so I received my BA and my MA in the Department of Philosophy and Religion at Western Kentucky University. I received my BA in 2006 in religion and philosophy, and then I went back to Western Kentucky University in 2011 when I received my MA again in the Department of Religion, and I finished that, I think, in 2014. But overall, Greg, my academic journey has been a kind of long and ongoing journey since 2001. And it's never really been a straightforward process of getting my BA, my MA, and then my PhD. I spent many years, for instance, between my bachelor's and my master's working in the manufacturing world. I worked for a detergent company as a raw materials handler. And then I worked in kind of quality management for that same company. All the while, I was still into continental philosophy, religion, and Afrocentric literature over the course of that time. But I never really seriously entertained the possibility of being a full-time academic. And then in 2011, so this several years after I received my BA in 2006, I went back to the university actually to get a certificate in teaching English as a second language because I wanted to go to Japan, Korea, or somewhere in Asia to teach English. But in the course of doing so, I met one of my old professors, a scholar of Sri Lankan Buddhism, named Jeffrey Samuels, who told me, hey, the university now, our department in religious studies has an MA program. And instead of like trying to teach English, you should try to get into that, study like Asian religions or something. And so he talked me into doing that. And since then, that's, where I've been, even though the journey has changed. Now I'm in the Ph.D. program at McMaster University. I'm ready to defend my dissertation on November the 9th, which is about the hip hop group we talked about, the Wu-Tang Clan. And just a few things about that day. In fact, November the 9th is my mother's birthday. It's also the 30th anniversary of the Wu-Tang Clan's debut album, Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers. It's also the eve of my own birthday on November the 10th. And what else is special about that? Oh, the Marvels movie is supposed to be coming out that day. So I'm a big Marvel fan. So there's so much like kind of cosmic and academic significance with that. So
let's chat about your musical journey as well. I want to know about your life as a music fan, because you hone in on a particular artist within your own academic work. And so I'm just curious about like your journey into music as a fan, and then maybe a little bit about your origin story with being interested in Wu-Tang Clan.
So first of all, I grew up in Mississippi, where I had much exposure to, Black American music. That's all that I was surrounded by. So I had much exposure to the blues, rhythm and blues, 1960s and 70s African-American soul music. So the Whispers, Curtis Mayfield, and so on. And also because I was in the Black church, I was exposed to a lot of Black spirituals and gospel music. But eventually I became a kind of hardcore fan of rap music. And my interest in rap music, of course, went through a few phases. So my interest in rap music started like in the 1990s, the early 1990s, with my exposures to West Coast gangster rap music. That was kind of like the dominant sound of the day. So I was interested in artists like Dr. Dre, Compton, Most Wanted, South Central Cartel, Spice One, Ghetto Boys, and so on and so on. It was a really kind of a gangster aesthetic music that I was into. Then by the late 90s, mid to late 90s, my interest shifted to kind of New York or East Coast rap music. And that is when I developed an interest in artists like the Wu-Tang Clan, Nas, Mobb Deep, Capone Noriega, Boot Camp Click, and so on. Later, I would say in the 2000s, by the time I moved to Kentucky and into the American Midwest, my experiences there exposed me to kind of an underground stream of hip hop. So I became very much interested in kind of underground battle rap culture. Like this was a little bit removed from the mainstream music of the West Coast gangster rap, the East Coast hip hop, and even the South that was dominating that day. But I became interested in artists like Madlib, MF Doom, Murs, Atmosphere, and so on. And that was a whole nother thing. In the process of that, I also want to say that from about 1996 up to 2009, I was a hip hop artist myself.
Awesome.
So I had a hip hop group in Mississippi and we recorded music there. I started to officially record in like 1996. And then when I moved to Kentucky and into Indiana in the 2000s, I started getting into another sound with I recorded music with some friends there who was doing what they call, authentic hip hop, underground hip hop. So that's my journey with music.
Tell me why Wu-Tang Clan is so absolutely special to you, because you've got this dissertation that you're working on. The title is Transcendence in the World of the Wu-Tang Clan. So I want to know about why this group matters so much to you. But then I also want you to tell listeners who the Wu-Tang Clan are in the grand scheme of music and hip hop history if they don't really have much familiarity with their work.
Let me start with just who the Wu-Tang Clan, who they are, first, and then I'll talk about like why they matter to me.
Sure.
So the Wu-Tang Clan, for people who may not know, this was originally a 9-man hip hop group from Staten Island, New York, which was known to them as Shaolin. They identified it with a religious tradition, an actual religious tradition in place that they actually encountered through Kung Fu films. In fact, the whole identity of the group itself, was based upon Kung Fu films. Their debut album, which came out in 1993, Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, took inspiration from films, 1970s and 80s Kung Fu films, such as, Bruce Lee's Enter the Dragon, and the Shaw Brothers associated films of the 36th Chamber of Shaolin and Wu-Tang. And, even though we can talk about like what the Wu meant at the time of their debut release, like in 1993, at that era, at the height of gangster rap. I think the Wu-Tang Clan is one of the very few groups who is still around today, who still kind of has a cultural relevance in American popular culture and popular culture at large and globally. 2019, for instance, was a very special year for the Wu-Tang Clan. Staten Island, their hometown, their home base, or Shaolin, was honored with a street called the Wu-Tang Clan District, right? So to kind of celebrate the Wu-Tang Clan and their contributions to culture and the world. So sad, one person. Also in 2019, there was two kind of television series that came out in honor of the Wu-Tang Clan, celebrating them. One was a documentary series that was aired by Showtime called Of Mics and Men, where they actually get the Wu-Tang Clan together, all of the remaining members, and to interview them about their coming of age in the music industry, which was an amazing feat because it's hard to get all of those guys together now, especially in their careers. And then at the same time, in the same year, there was a drama series that aired called Wu-Tang: An American Saga, that, kind of told a fictionalized story about the Wu-Tang Clan's early beginnings from about the early 90s up until their second debut album in 1997, Wu-Tang Forever. And, it in some ways it shows this, those things show how the Wu-Tang Clan has kind of, maintained their relevance in popular culture to the day, and why they matter. And there are many other things that we can point out. But as for my own interest in the Wu-Tang Clan and why I took a focus in them, I think it was because the Wu-Tang Clan had a really big impact on me in my youth. When I transitioned from like listening to gangster rap to the East Coast rap and to the Wu-Tang Clan, it was because the Wu-Tang Clan offered me something a little bit different. There was something, an aura of mystery around their rhymes. I was listening to these guys who were very much into like lyricism, martial arts. It was kind of esoteric language. There was also something spiritual about the music. I come to learn that they were like people who were of the Islamic tradition, a Black American Islamic tradition called the 5% Nation of Gods and Herbs. And that kind of exposed me to an alternative religious worldview, alternative to the Black Christian church, with which I was familiar in, Mississippi coming of age. So eventually later, of course, with the Wu-Tang Clan, and especially when I went into college as an undergraduate and I started studying Asian religions, I started to have this opportunity to see how the Wu was also, taking from Asian religions into their music. And it just kind of gave me something that, a lot to think about there. And what has happened now, especially, as I've aged and now I'm looking back on the Wu-Tang Clan and looking at their music, looking at their corpus of work, I just find so many things that the Wu-Tang Clan allows us to really talk about, whether it's Asian religions, Black religions, whether it's, about race or just meaning and transcendence. And maybe even for me, one of the things I was interested in with the Wu-Tang Clan was this kind of Afro-Asian connection, that they had. I think the Wu-Tang Clan participates in a kind of historical and cultural discourse of Black encounters with Asia. And for me, who was a person really interested in Japanese religions, Asia, wanting to go and live in, somewhere in Japan, Korea, or Taiwan, the Wu-Tang Clan became a way of me to meditate on what was it about this interest in Asia that I had as a kind of Black person.
So we've got, as far as I can tell, there are 6 current members, right? We've got Method Man, RZA, ODB, Ghostface, Raekwon, and Inspectah Deck. And it seems to me like RZA has a really important focus within your own work, because I found like the purpose that you wrote up for your dissertation. It's like the fundamental thread of significance that ties together the mythical world of the Wu, especially from the perspective of RZA, is a quest for transcendence, a project that is replete with stylistic, spiritual, existential, cross-cultural, and racial implications. And I would love if you could tease this apart a little bit for me. Tell me a little bit about RZA and then like the purpose of what you're trying to accomplish with your dissertation here.
Yeah, so sure thing. One thing that I would say, I think the Wu-Tang Clan now is about 8 members, just to be sure. I think
Oh, okay.
so there's RZA, yeah, so there's RZA, Jizza, Ghostface Killer, Inspector Deck, Master Killer, Raekwon, You God, a gentleman named You God,
Right.
and there's the one who's kind of an honorary Wu-Tang Clan member, Capadonna, and Old Dirty Bastard, who was an original member of the group, had passed away in 2004. So I would still say the Wu-Tang Clan is a 9-man hip hop group, including ODB, but there's the recognition that he's, gone. And you're right, RZA does play a kind of important role, in my research, because he's the so-called de facto leader of the Wu-Tang Clan, the founder of it. He, Jizza, and Old Dirty Bastard. He's also the one who's been at the forefront kind of articulating the so-called meaning of the Wu, the Wu spirituality, what the Wu-Tang Clan is all about. But to break down what I'm doing with my research on the Wu-Tang Clan, there are like really kind of two main threads or two main arguments that I'm trying to make about the Wu and that I want people to understand. The first is that when I look over the course of Wu-Tang Clan's productions, which includes their music, their films, and other kind of associated productions, other than just the music per se, I think that the Wu-Tang Clan has created a sort of mythical world, right? And this is a world with its own worldview and ethos. It is a world that was inspired by those films, those Chinese kung fu films, right, that gave them the kind of models for thinking about their own worldview and their own ethos. It gave them the models for kind of reimagining their performance art of emceeing as a martial art. So we think about the Wu-Tang Clan as these lyrical kind of martial artists who hail straight from the slums of Shaolin. They're not just an island, but it's Shaolin, right? In this Wu-Tang, right? So there's this kind of mythology to the Wu-Tang Clan that I want to talk about, this mythology in this mythical world. And I insist that we kind of understand the Wu-Tang Clan as such. The other thing that I would point out, and probably the heart of what I want to argue about the Wu-Tang Clan, is that when we look over the course of their world making and world maintenance, one of the things that we find is this ongoing insistence on transcendence. By transcendence, I don't mean that the Wu-Tang Clan is trying to achieve some kind of outer bodily estate or some kind of, to attain some kind of spiritual realm. What I mean is that there's this kind of ongoing quest to expand their global and cross-cultural reach, to make the Wu, if anything, symbolic of something that is perennial, universal, and that transcends national, racial, and cultural borders. So the Wu is not just a hip hop group, but it's kind of this kind of perennial worldview that embraces people of all backgrounds. And I think that we find this throughout the Wu-Tang Clan's corpus, especially from like 1997 and forward, right? This kind of growing idea about the meaning of the Wu. So there's the mythological world of the Wu, and there's this ongoing meaning that kind of ties it into its own, ties this world into its own web of significance. And now the importance of RZA in this is that, RZA has been, again, as the leader of the Wu-Tang Clan, he's been at the forefront articulating what is the meaning of the Wu, especially in his later works, like in 2003 and 2009, his Wu-Tang Manual and the Tao of the Wu. He's very kind of clear about expressing a Wu-Tang spirituality, a Wu-Tang worldview that embraces people of all races and religious and cultural backgrounds. I focus on the RZA. And in some ways, there's some complications with that because we do have to be considerate of the other Wu-Tang Clan members and their perception of the Wu and the meaning of the Wu. But he's there, really articulating what is the, moral and spiritual significance of the Wu. And that's what I'm interested in. Lastly, before we go on, in this case, again, I'm interested in the meaning making and the world making of the Wu, but I also wanted to maintain that there is some kind of cultural, racial, and spiritual or religious significance to this. So when I'm talking about this kind of meaning making, world making, and this quest for transcendence, it seems all existential and philosophical, but I do want to express that I'm not as naive just to assert that, this is about the meaning of the Wu, but there's something there too to talk about in terms of, race, identity, and other issues and culture if we really want to look for it. So
I love that. I want to talk about a little bit about some specific examples that people can latch onto within the catalog of the Wu-Tang Clan discography, but also in the projects that like go beyond just the Wu-Tang Clan name into some of the solo work. And you were so kind because as a former record store employee, I was definitely not unfamiliar with Wu-Tang Clan's work, but everything that you're saying to me about like the world building aspect and the way that it connects within spirituality and religions, this is all new to me. So I asked you to put together a playlist for me, and you sent over a really good list for a song title. I'm just going to go through them here real quick so the people out there can see this, but we've got Bring to Ruckus from 1993, Reunited from 1997, Second Coming from 1997, One Blood Under W 2000, and then we have a RZA solo track, which is Chi Kung, I believe, from 2003, and Life Changes from 2007, Ruckus in B minor from 2014, and then Fate of the World from 2022. So we've got this chronological sequenced order of tracks that you curated personally for me. And I'm wondering if you can just tell me a little bit about the playlist and the sequence, and then tell me how these all kind of fit together in almost like a story.
So yeah, I sent you that playlist, and thank you for asking for a playlist, by the way. I created a playlist that reflects not necessarily the most popular songs of the Wu-Tang Clan, some of the most, famous songs that people know them for, but some of the songs that I think are very essential to maybe the world making of the Wu or the status of the world, songs that reflect something about the status of their world, or songs that speak to us about this ongoing quest for transcendence, right? And you're right, it is in a kind of chronological order. And in some ways, I think that reflects this kind of this progression, the quest in itself, as well as the world making and the world building. So the first song that I offered you was Bring the Ruckus. And this is a track from the Wu's debut album, Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers. It is the first song that you hear on the album. And basically, the significance of this song is that it introduces us to the mythology of the Wu-Tang Clan as these lyrical warriors who come straight from the slums of Shaolin. It sets basically the tone and mood for the entire album, giving us a sense of what the Wu-Tang Clan world is like. And basically, this is a world that's of lyrical martial artists and who will cut your heads off, right? Because the song kind of gives us a sense of a lot of danger and threat of this lyrical martial art. So the song actually begins with, it opens not with any words from the Wu-Tang Clan themselves. It opens actually with one of the films or cinematic myths that inspired the whole mythology of the Wu-Tang Clan. So it opens with a sample from a film called Shaolin and Wu-Tang. And basically you hear this sample of a Chinese man in English dub saying Shaolin shadow boxing in the Wu-Tang sword style. If what you say is true, then the Shaolin and the Wu-Tang can be dangerous. Do you think your Wu-Tang sword can defeat me? On guard, I'll let you inside my Wu-Tang style. And after that, like all hell breaks loose with these lyrics for the artists who are on there, right? Telling you that this is a world of lyrical martial arts and danger. So the song is very significant in that it kind of introduces you to this world. And I'm not just saying that from my own perspective. RZA himself had clearly articulated this in an interview with Wired magazine in 2007 when he was questioned about the song and that particular sample. He says that, hey, this is really just to bring you into the world, into the mentality that we were in, this Shaolin Wudang martial arts, right? So we're trying to give you a sense of the mood and tone of what we're all about. Now, all of the songs on that album, Enter the 36 Chambers, are not all about lyrical martial arts, but a great many of them are. And that is kind of the, overall feeling that you get with the album. Another thing that I will argue is that the album itself, is reflects this kind of rite of initiation, where entering the 36 chambers, you're entering in kind of to a mystery system or an initiation system where you're being initiated into this kind of lyrical martial art, right? And it's replete with spiritual as well as stylistic significance. And Yeah, and with just the whole idea of initiation itself, I tend to look at that as kind of a world producing phenomenon. Like you go through initiations to kind of create a new experience of the world, or to, remake the world, to borrow from the, phenomenologist of religion, Mircea Eliade. So, but that's the main importance of Bring the Ruckus, that is at the very foundation of the Wu-Tang's world, and it introduces you to the Wu-Tang Clan and what they were originally about in the very beginning. So following Bring the Ruckus, and following Enter the 36 Chambers, by the way, the Wu-Tang Clan would come out with several other albums. They would come out with solo albums of artists who were signed to different record labels, but at the same time carrying the Wu-Tang Clan brand, forward in other spaces. And in doing this too, they're kind of creating really this like interconnected universe, something like we may associate it with cinematic universes of today in Disney and Warner Brothers, DCEU, or Marvel Comics. But they kind of literally kind of created this sonic interconnected universe across various record labels and something and more. And then by 1997, the Wu-Tang Clan would return with their second collective album called Wu-Tang Forever. And the significance of this album really had a kind of a twofold purpose, or a twofold significance. What they were aiming to do on this album was to extend their global reach and conquer the world through their lyricism and through their 5% spirituality. They returned collectively with this kind of purposes of world dominance and world conquering, lyrically and spiritually. So the next two tracks that I have given you here, Reunited and Second Coming, are two tracks from that album that actually reflects the goals of that album, right? And by the way, before I mention something about them, let me say that if you look at the album cover of Wu-Tang Forever, you will see on the album cover a scaled projection of the globe with the Wu-Tang Clan symbol in the very middle, right? And it kind of signifies that there's this kind of quest for world dominance here. And just above that globe, you will see kind of like a faint image of the Wu-Tang Clan on the stage, rapping to a large crowd, which in some ways represents the peoples of the world, right? And so that's what you have there. So for Reunited, the first song that I gave you, this is going to be the first track on the intro of the first album, because Wu-Tang Forever, by the way, is a double album. So we're talking about the first song after the intro on the first album of that project. It's a song that shows how the Wu conceives of themselves as returning as a kind of world significant and world changing event. And it has a kind of messianic and sacred quality. On that track, RZA says that we return like Jesus when the whole world needs us, right?
Yes.
So he's saying that the Wu-Tang is coming back and we have a certain kind of sacred purpose to, to save the world, right? There are reasons for this, and we can talk about them if you want to, why they kind of conceive themselves as having that kind of mission. Overall, this fits again within the entire project of the album, that the Wu is here to dominate the world through teaching what they consider to be authentic hip hop in the ways of the 5% nation of gods and earths. Now, the Second Coming, which is the last song on the second album of that project, there's no rapping from the Wu-Tang Clan on this song. In fact, there's only singing by a Wu associate by the name of Takitha, right? And the song again presents the Wu's collective return as a kind of messianic and world-saving event, and perhaps more in a more poignant way than the song Reunited does, because Takitha is on the song and she's presenting herself as being in a kind of assuming like a project building, a government housing in New York City, and she's with her child, and she's looking down on the streets, and she sees kind of moral depravity and chaos, and she's just, she's obviously sad. But eventually she says that she looks into the sky and she sees the Wu-Tang symbol, the bird-like W appears, and it's kind of rupture up to the sacred and to the world, and she says, the God or gods are finally here. The assumption here is that the Wu-Tang Clan is coming to save the world by saving hip hop, by bringing true lyricism and teaching the ways of the gods and earths. And so it kind of works into this kind of, messianic and sacred quest to expand their reach.
Some of the things that I absolutely love is that when I was reading the lyrics of these songs too, it's so cool the way that like there's also religious imagery strewn about, and what that means in the context of the songs in your interpretations and what you're saying. I was like right in there too, because in Reunited, I love the lyric from metaphorical parables to fertilize the earth. I love the lyric, my mama serves free lunch from the church. In Second Coming, I love how they talk about false MCs, because in the worlds of like religion and religious traditions, we're always talking about what is false and what is authentic. You know what I mean? And then that line in Second Coming where she sings, God released the tape out early May. I was cracking up because I absolutely love that. Like there's so many good little lines in these first couple of songs that you've discussed that I just wanted to point out some of my favorite lyrics. That's really it.
No, that's great, because it's like, you're right. It's, the Wu-Tang Clan are perceiving themselves as saving hip hop, and through saving hip hop, they're saving the world. And it's all conceived as a kind of like a sacred event and a kind of global and world-reaching phenomenon. And so, I would say with that album, this is the first instance where we see the Wu trying to extend that global reach. We see that kind of rhetoric, but in the context of being 5%ers and lyrical martial artists. Now, the fourth song that I sent to you was One Blood Under W. Now, this is a track on the Wu's third collective album called The W. And in some ways, the song kind of advances this this global aim or ideal that we find on Wu-Tang Forever. And it advances it in some sense in that, this is the first time we hear the Wu speak kind of, explicitly, more or less explicitly about, uniting people across the world, right? I don't think that we really had that on a Wu-Tang Forever album. It was just kind of the rhetoric of their global conquest. But this is the first instance where we hear the Wu-Tang Clan say, hey, we are a symbol under which the whole world is united. So ironically, while the song in itself, which features only the Wu-Tang Clan artist Master Killer and a associated reggae artist, Junior Reed, while the song seems to be in some ways a diss record, probably dissing one of their contemporary hip hop artists, and I want to say maybe 50 Cent. I'm not sure. The song overall, conceptually and in terms of the chorus that Junior Reed sings, it presents the Wu, or this idea of the W, which is a shorthand for the Wu, or it's representative of the Wu-Tang Clan's logo. It presents the W as a symbol for unifying people across all local and national borders. It is one of the first instances, I believe, where we find the idea of the W as such, becoming symbolic of such a kind of universal worldview. Now, I'm not saying that the W album itself overall kind of consistently expresses this theme, but this is one of the the most important songs, or the song that kind of highlights conceptually what the W mean. Now, there's a little bit of a backstory to the W that I want to share that kind of reinforces this point. So after the Wu-Tang Forever album, RZA speaks about having kind of two experiences. He speaks of this in his in his Tao of the Wu from 2009. And he also speaks about it in an interview with Kung Fu magazine. He says that, I had one experience was that after the Wu-Tang Forever album, even though we had the whole world in our hand, we kind of dropped it. And the reason why he says that they dropped it is because the Wu's worldview was a little bit too myopic. It was still a little bit race-centered. He said that he still thought that hip-hop and the world was to kind of belong to the Black man. Even though Wu-Tang Forever was about extending the global reach, reaching out to all peoples, it was still coming from a perspective that hip-hop really belonged to the Black man. And then he says, I realized that no, it didn't belong to the Black man. And if we were going to be able to endure, it had to expand that kind of worldview. And he eventually goes back to talk about how Taoism, showed him that, that he needed to be in harmony with the kind of universal way and in the way of the world. And And that was an interesting point. And so that was an experience he has, and he talks about that in the Tao of the Wu. And then in Kung Fu magazine, he talks about his pilgrimage to China in 1999, just before the W album came out, and where he went to the actual Shaolin Temple in Hainan, China, and the actual Wudang Temple in the Wudang Mountains in Hubei, China. And in Wudang, he says that he had an experience where he looked out into the mountain ranges of the Wudang, and he saw that there were 9 peaks called the 9 dragons, and each of these were more or less synonymous with, the 9 members of the Wu-Tang Clan.
Amazing.
And he said that looking at the peaks, he noticed a kind of formation of 3 of the mountains that formed the Wu-Tang symbol. And for him, this signified the destiny of the Wu-Tang Clan. And by the way, for your listeners out there, there are a few people that, talk about this experience. Sophia Chains, one of RZA's Korean Canadian managers in their early career, went with him on this journey, and she talks about it in her book called The Baddest Bitch in the Room. So she talks a lot about the Wu and this experience in China. RZA talks about it himself, of course, in his Wu-Tang manual and this Tao of the Wu. And there's also an article by a fellow martial artist of RZA who talks about this experience as well, recounts it in the Kung Fu magazine. Later, I can send you a link to that article if you want to share it with your listeners. So you have this significance of the W itself, and also in relationship to that experience, RZA says that, hey, I learned the true meaning of the Wu-Tang Clan. I learned that the true meaning of the Wu-Tang Clan is not just about lyrical martial arts. No, it's not just about that. No, the true meaning of the Wu-Tang Clan is about being in harmony with God, and God is a universal phenomenon. When I was there on the Wu-Tang Mountain, I felt this kind of connection to all things. And so he talks about the Wu now as a kind of theological and perennial world view, right? Where it's about a genuine experience of God that all of us can experience, right? And for his teachings in the 5%, they always taught him that, the Black man is God. But then he says, no, we all can be God. And so you get this kind of universalistic experience that comes from his experience of the Wudang Mountains and the W there. And then he also says in this Kung Fu magazine that he also learned that the Wu's responsibility now is to help other people of all races, racial, ethnic backgrounds to learn things about Buddhism, Islam, Taoism. And so he sees the Wu now as having a kind of very multicultural significance. Now, my point in saying all of this is just to say that this is taking place before the W album. So I think these are things that are kind of coming in and shaping, the meaning of the Wu. And it may have some kind of underlying significance about the W and this song One Blood on the W, which is about uniting people in some ways all about the world, despite whatever Master Killer is rapping about.
Amazing. Okay. And in that song too, we've got another couple lyrics that I like, and then I'm going to take you on to the next song from the RZA solo record. But he's got there's a lyric I like that draws on some religious imagery. Scrape the craters of the brain for data, old scriptures on withered paper, beginning take shape and form when the gods get on it and crash your college dorm. I love these lines, man. I love them.
So right. Yeah. I love those lines too. And honestly, I've spent so much time trying to dwell on those lines. What in the world are you talking about? But it sounds so cool. Sounds so cool. And Master Killer is one of the most, underrated MCs within the Wu-Tang Clan. And he's a very kind of profound, artist. And yeah, definitely. And there was one song that I actually wanted to share with you from his album, which is by the name Master Killer No Said Date. I think the song itself is titled Master Killer, where he kind of has this oriental, sound or music behind his rapping. And he's rapping kind of Nation of Islam theology over, this oriental Chinese sound. And he's kind of, I don't know how to explain it, but equating Nation of Islam theology in a kind of orientalized way, talking even about the Tao and Wu Chi and water and essence. Anyway, that's another thing, and you can choose to include that if you want to. But yeah,
amazing.
Yeah.
Take me forward to 2003 and RZA's solo record.
So on RZA's solo record, they or the next song that we have here is a song Chi Kong. This is a track from RZA's third solo album called The Birth of a Prince. Now, prior to this, RZA had already had two other albums under the alias of Bobby Digital, who represents a kind of alter ego of the RZA, right? He's the kind of the shadow portion of RZA, and RZA is supposed to be this kind of enlightened person, the abbot of the Wu-Tang Clan, so to speak. And so his album, Birth of the Prince, the third album, is supposed to be in some ways representative of a kind of spiritual rebirth of the RZA. But the song itself, Chi Kong, especially with its opening lines, is one of the first instances in the Wu-Tang corpus where we find the religious discourses of Taoism being appropriated in a way that universalizes the spiritual worldview of the Wu, which again was originally founded on the 5% nation of gods and earths. Now, of course, RZA had already, been to China. He was already familiar with, Taoism and Buddhism and exploring that. My point is just that if we look at the Wu's corpus, this is, insofar as I know, one of the first songs where we actually find elements of Taoism being incorporated into the Wu's music and worldview. And the most important lines from this song is actually the first few lyrics of the song, where RZA, he starts off by evoking kind of like the cosmological rhetoric of the Tao, and he situates Islam and as well as the whole cinematic myths that inspired him within that kind of context. He says, the grand ultimate supreme, no extremities we use, Tai Chi to deflect off our enemies, 5 poisons from the clan, there's no remedy. We dispel the spell of wickedness in our vicinity, Bobby, the atomic Islamic bomb dropping. And he just goes on and on, right? But we could break down those lyrics, but just suffice it to say that when he speaks about the grand ultimate supreme, no extremities, he's talking about this Taoist concept of Wu Qi that is supposed to be kind of universal. It's the non-manifest essence of all phenomena that exist in the phenomenal world, right? And so he's saying, yo, I'm a lyricist, I'm a lyrical martial artist. He's appealing to the 5 deadly venoms, another kung fu movie from the 70s, talking about the 5 deadly poisons. And he's saying that, yo, I'm Islamic too, but he's also placing this all in a kind of, Taoist associated context, cosmological idea. Also, the very title of the song, Chi Kong, refers to a Chinese kinesthetic practice or kind of breathing exercise that, according to the Taoist scholar Christopher Schipper, is supposed to be a kind of a premeditation or a preparation for uniting yourself with the one, with the Tao, right? So, there's all of that that's under, lying that theme of the song. And so the song really doesn't tell us too much about like the moral and spiritual significance of this, I guess, in terms of the Wu's world and their universalizing idea. But it is that kind of first instance where we, again, find this, Taoist or East Asian spiritual influence coming into the Wu. And it's a kind of, I guess, a preparation for what RZA would articulate later as the Tao of the Wu, again, in his books, The Wu-Tang Manual and The Tao of the Wu. And the next song, it kind of continues this that I have listed, the song Life Changes. Again, this song really doesn't tell us too much about this kind of quest for transcendence, but it really has to do with the state of the world of the Wu-Tang Clan. So again, returning to my notes. So Life Changes is the final song on Wu's 5th collective album called The 8 Diagrams. The album itself borrows its title from a Chinese kung fu film called The 8 Diagram Pole Fighter, as well as from the idea of the 8 trigrams that's taken from the Chinese book of classics called the I Ching, or the Book of Changes. Overall, I think the album itself is really about the state of Wu's world. It's about the world of the Wu kind of suffering changes and corrosions from basically 2 things. One is this kind of like friction within the Wu-Tang Clan itself. A lot of the Wu-Tang Clan members weren't really feeling RZA's direction with the group, with the musical production. And so we can talk about this kind of, tension within the brotherhood of the Wu-Tang Clan. And also, the song is about the death of one of the Wu-Tang Clan members in 2004, the Old Dirty Bastard, or ODB. And, for many of the Wu-Tang Clan members, the death of Old Dirty Bastard was one of the things that kind of fractured the Wu-Tang Clan, that kind of really hurted that glue of brotherhood in there. And so the song Life Changes is basically dealing with this kind of state of the Wu-Tang Clan. And it's a song that's dedicated specifically to ODB. It's all of the Wu-Tang Clan members, with the exception of Ghostface Killah, singing their odes to Old Dirty Bastard. And what's interesting about that song as well is that at the very end, RZA's friend, teacher, his kung fu teacher, Shi Ying Ming, comes in and chants the Heart Sutra, a Buddhist text that deals with the, impermanence of all things. And a text that basically tells us that the perfection of wisdom or insight is to see that all phenomenon suffers change. And, to be wise is to see that. And he's chanting that at the end of the song, which again shows how kind of East Asian spiritualities, in this case, Buddhism, is coming in and helping to maintain this world that the RZA has created. So
I love it. And I love the line, "It's hard to live without you, God. I shouldn't have doubted you." When you said that the passion of Christ was all about you, like, it's really beautiful. It's a really beautiful song too.
It's a very beautiful song. It's a touching song. It's really about time, change, and the whole album itself. It's a really dark album, but especially that it takes from the I Ching. It's really about change in the world, and change, a world suffering change, and how do we endure that? And let me say about Old Dirty Bastard himself, we speak about this kind of quest for transcendence, and we talk about RZA's own quest for transcendence through creating this Tao of the Wu and making the Wu symbolic of a perennial worldview. ODB was a person he was kind of the same mind. And I think there's evidence across his corpus too, where we see him pursuing a certain kind of racial, cultural, and national transcendence, but through the ecstasy of intoxication and sensuality, and pleasure. And he kind of represented that. He was on the one hand, very much critical of white systemic racism, but at the same time, he was also about uniting people just through sheer pleasure and fun.
Well, tell me about Ruckus and B minor. Let's go into this last decade or so that you've got here for Ruckus and B minor and Fate of the World.
So the last two songs that I presented to you were two songs in the later part of the Wu-Tang Clan's career. And I presented them to you because I think they represent the more mature Wu-Tang Clan, where we start to begin to see, what really are the kind of moral or spiritual implications of what the RZA and the Wu had been creating. Now, the song Ruckus in B minor, this came out in 2014. This was the first track on RZA's 6 LP, not RZA, I'm sorry, the Wu-Tang Clan's collectively 6 LP, A Better Tomorrow, which compared to the A Diagrams album, which was very gloomy and dark, dealing with death and change, this album kind of promises a kind of brighter future, a days ahead for the Wu-Tang Clan and for the world overall. So the album reflects, the Wu's maturity over 2 decades since their debut. We can see this when we compare the Ruckus in B minor with the original Bring the Ruckus that was on this list from the Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers. There's a notable, difference, an air of maturity. But the real reason why I gave you this song, Greg, was not so much for the song itself. What I was wanting to do was to give you this song and the link to the song, to the YouTube video where you can see the album cover associated with the song, because the album cover is what's really unique, and it speaks to the song and to the rest of the productions on the album. So on the album cover, what you see is a literal island of, I'm assuming that it's an island of different landmarks from around the world, Europe, Africa, Asia, America, all converge into one place, right? Under this clear blue sky of the Wu-Tang symbol in the heavens in the form of a cumulus cloud. So it's a very kind of auspicious sign. We recall, we talked about Takitha talking about the Wu-Tang Clan sign rupturing, appearing in the sky as a sign of hope. And so here you have the whole world united on this visual art with the Wu-Tang Clan sign above it. And so the Wu is united the whole world literally under their symbol. So that's what it represents. And so that's so fascinating to me. And, again, compared with the 8 diagrams, the whole album covers aesthetic as well as the contents of the album itself. It's very, happy, very, kind of inspiring. Some, people who've listened to it says it sounds almost Walt Disney, kind of like, some fans of the Wu-Tang Clan. But, it's also an album where, on that very song, the Ruckus in B minor, you have samples of Old Dirty Bastard on there, opening the song. They took samples from some of his old music. And it seems like, Old Dirty Bastard has been resurrected. And he's actually there in the studio recording them. And by the way, Old Dirty Bastard's aliases were Osiris and Big Baby Jesus. So he's been associated with gods of death and resurrection. But that's the real importance of that song that I sent you. I really wanted to gear your attention towards the album cover, where you see all of these places around the world being united under the Wu-Tang symbol.
Then in 2015, something happens that drives music fans crazy, and that is the existence of the Once Upon a Time in Shaolin single copy standalone album that was bought by the pharma guy, Martin Shkreli. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit about what you know about this and if it drives you completely insane that you can't listen to it every single day.
Yeah, it drives me really insane that I cannot listen to it. Well, one thing that I know about that album is that it wasn't really a product of RZA himself. I know that there's a lot of controversy around the album, not simply because of Martin Shkreli, if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, the pharmaceutical guy who purchased it and then eventually was locked up or went to jail for securities fraud and had the album taken from him. But the controversies about it is that the Wu-Tang Clan themselves weren't really in the know about the album. They were kind of, convinced to contribute to the album by an outside figure who was outside to them, a gentleman by the name of Silver Rings, who joined the Wu-Tang Clan maybe in the early 2000s as a kind of understudy of the RZA. I think he was from somewhere in Europe. But Silver Rings had this kind of idea of, creating a Wu-Tang album, a classic Wu-Tang album that recalled the old Wu-Tang from, the Enter the 36 Chambers. And what he wanted to do was to make only one copy of that album and to sell it as high art. And his rationale for doing this was to, to reevaluate the significance of music in an era where now it's digital streaming and the music of the value of the physical media itself, the CD, the cover, and all of that stuff has been devalued. They created one copy that will be sold to the highest bidder. It had some people listen to it at MoMA, at the Museum of Art in New York. So yeah. I think that, with the album itself, what it really signified in terms of the Wu's quest for transcendence, it was looking back nostalgically to a kind of past, of when the Wu-Tang Clan's world was really, stable and steady, when there was like a kind of brotherhood there. And it tried to recapture that old Wu-Tang sound that fans really wanted and that they missed, because a lot of the fans are not really, happy with RZA's creative direction on the recent Wu-Tang's albums, not even like A Better Tomorrow. It was also, so Once Upon a Time in Shaolin is looking back to that mythical past, but it's also looking kind of forward, right? Because from what I understand, the public wouldn't have really access to this album, or it wouldn't be publicly distributed until like 88 years after the album was sold. Right. So it was kind of the Wu-Tang Clan looking forward to kind of maintain their legacy in the future. So the Wu-Tang Clan is no ordinary group. We're going to be here literally forever, and we're going to have this significance in 88 years to come. So it was a way of kind of making their mark. But it's a very controversial album because not all of the Wu-Tang Clan members were on top of it. The album did not consist of RZA's productions. RZA just supported the idea. He supported his student, Silver Rings, into making the project. But it definitely, on multiple levels, has this quality of transcendence, transcending, culture by becoming a piece of high art, and also kind of transcending time by looking into the Wu's future and their relevance in the near future. I mean, not the near future, I mean like 88 years, almost a century away in the future. And some of the Wu-Tang Clan members too have issues with that. Like, what's the point of making an album if our fans not going to be able to enjoy it?
Yeah,
And
I
we didn't
think
even know that it was a Wu-Tang Clan album, so to say.
yeah, and I think that I read some commentary from Method Man specifically where he was very critical of the 88-year commercial ban.
Yeah.
Um, it's just such a strange thing to be out in the world, and especially someone like you, because like me, not being like a massive Wu-Tang Clan fan myself, I was kind of like, oh, okay, well, I guess I just won't hear it. But someone like you who like loves this group, I would imagine this would drive you crazy because I was thinking about like, what if my favorite artist did something like that and I couldn't hear it, and I know that I wouldn't ever be able to hear it within my lifetime? Like that would drive me bananas.
Right, right. Surely. I'm going to press on to this last song and
Yeah,
just cover it, The Fate of the World.
yeah.
This is a song that came out in 2022. This is a track from RZA. So this is a track from one of RZA's recent LPs under the alias of RZA. Actually, an album called RZA versus Bobby Digital, Saturday Afternoon Kung Fu. So it's dealing kind of with this, dichotomy between RZA and his alter egos on Bobby Digital. This is one of the first songs that I believe explicitly expresses the political and spiritual ideas of the Wu, which had been developing over the course of their career, and notably in this foregoing playlist that we've been uncovering, right? So, I mentioned how, we've been talking about how there's been this ongoing quest of transcendence from the Wu-Tang Forever to One Blood on the W. And then we talked about the image of Ruckus in B minor. But here's one of the first songs where we see RZA in some ways trying to, articulate the meaning of the Wu for our sociocultural and political world. And basically what the song tells us is that, the Wu-Tang Clan has already waged a spiritual war on our behalf. They have already been at the forefront creating this kind of worldview under which we can all unite. And basically what the chorus tells us is that it's up to us. The world is in our hand. The sociocultural and political world is now in our hands. And it's up to us to make the best of what the Wu-Tang Clan has offered. Right. And so in the chorus, and if you watch the video to the movie, you'll see that the chorus tells us what the chorus says is actually, left, right, come together, throw your hands up, it's Wu-Tang forever. And in the music video, what we see is that the RZA is actually, asking us to bring our hands together into the form of the Wu-Tang symbol, the W. And this is that the symbol under which we need to move forward and address the sociocultural ills of the world today. And so when you listen to the lyrics at the very beginning of the song, RZA is appealing to his Christian brothers, Hare Krishna brothers, and Jewish brothers, all to unite under the spirituality of the Wu, saying that we're all one. So again, we have this perennial worldview. And then he goes forth and he speaks, all of these kind of little, phrases, aphorisms, or spiritual platitudes or whatever, addressing what he sees as systemic injustices. And it seems to me addressing what he perceives as the kind of polarizing extremes of the left and the right, which I'm interpreting to be a kind of critique of, American partisan politics, and especially, from the 2020 and forward, happening after COVID and all of the, political troubles that can experience, especially with the transitions of power in the government and whatever and so on. And I see him trying to address that in his own way. And he's saying that, hey, the Wu-Tang Clan, we transcend all of these differences of left and right, right? We are the symbol under which you can unite. This is a spiritual battle and you can unite, under us, right? So, I mean, there's something that we can be critical about. There's some ways I'm kind of critical of it. I'm kind of suspect of celebrity who kind of put themselves out there as like, these beacons of hope and stuff. But, I understand. I think I understand where he's going and what it's about. And it really shows the kind of ultimate of this ideal of the Wu as RZA had been imagining it.
I mean, Mark, tell me some of your goals with this project, because I know that you're, involved in a public scholarship training through Sacred Rights, who is like, connected us together to make this episode. But tell me about some of your goals for the future with this work, because nothing feels more relevant to me than public scholarship that connects religion and popular culture. Like, this to me is like just there's so many directions you can go with this, and I'd just love to know where you see this going in the future for your work.
What do I really want to say about the Wu-Tang Clan and how they matter to the public? And I guess the reason why I'm doing this, on the one hand, what I really want people to understand about the work of the Wu-Tang Clan and just about cultural productions in general is, I want people to try to kind of treat kind of cultural productions, the things that we listen to, the movies that we watch, films that we watch, artists that we engage, to treat them, seriously, to take serious, what kind of meanings they are trying to create, but also to look at them kind of critically of what they're saying or of what they're not saying, right? So it's kind of this, I think that we are people who, immerse in various kind of forms of cultural productions. And I just want us to take that a little bit more seriously. I think the Wu-Tang Clan is just one example, for me, but that I'm working on, that, I kind of have a personal connection to, and I see a lot there and that I want to address. And I want to look at I want people to understand the meanings that are being created and so on within their productions. But there's also a concern with how does the Wu-Tang Clan matter, in the age of, these kind of racial divisions and hostilities, right? What does the Wu-Tang Clan really offer us in terms of culture? I think there's still some work to be done to ask, how does the Wu-Tang Clan really matter? Is there anything there? Is there any substance there? Is there anything that we can really take and to contribute to public discourse?
Marcus Evans, I am so delighted that we got to hang out and have this conversation. Maybe one of my favorite episodes I've ever done on this entire podcast, and like closing in on 300 episodes. And I am just completely delighted that we did this today. So thank you so much for being here and doing this with me. This has been just so much fun, like beyond belief.
Thank you. But thank you for having me. This has really been a lot of fun.